Okay, so today we are going to be learning a little bit about the Unity Prefab Editor. This is the new editor that Unity added in, I can't remember if it was 2019-2 or 2019-3, but either way, if you have a new-ish version of Unity, this should work out okay. The new Prefab Editor is one of the cooler things that they've added over the years. And while I'm going to say new, I guess 2 years isn't all that new, especially in technology. I'm going to be doing this recording in Unity version 2021.1.13, but really it should work in anything from 2019.3 onwards, and maybe even 2019.2. I just really don't remember which version it exactly released in. So any of those should be fine. And I'm starting off with a default sample scene, so everything is pretty basic. The one thing that I do have that you won't have at home would be this models folder that I've thrown some stuff in that I'm going to be using later, but you don't need to worry about that. So like just ignore the fact that that folder is there and everything is going to be fine. So the first thing, today's scenario, we're basically going to be pretending that we are designers as opposed to programmers or artists or something else. And we're just trying to do that prototype phase for a game where you've got like a lot of units running around. Any of those fantasy battles things, anything similar to, for instance, any like those Warhammer games or things like that. And so really what I want is big units of troops kind of crashing in on each other. So, like the Total War games. So what we're going to start off with today is we're just going to be doing some rapid prefabs, and our goal is going to be just to get enough detail in those prefabs to kind of know what we're looking at, start laying things out, getting things kind of proportional size and stuff like that, and be able to just learn some things about the editor. And for this one, since this is a beginner tutorial, I'm going to start off assuming that you really don't know anything about Unity at all yet. And so we're just going to start off with a brand new 3D project, and we're going to walk through from basically the very beginning. So the very, very first thing that that you're going to notice is that in our scene view here, I've got a brand new scene. It's pretty empty. I can see the horizon line. I'm moving around using the mouse buttons and kind of different combinations of Alt and left button, right button. But Alt left button is going to give me the ability to spin around. Right button is going to do the zoom, or I'm sorry, excuse me, center button. The scroll wheel is giving me this zoom. And by clicking on the center button, I'm able to do some panning here. So that's like a click and drag on the center button. Right is going to do some revolution, and left is going to allow me to do these box selects. So there's a few different things that we can do here. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of a view. We can see the horizon line, and that is a skybox. Like, it doesn't matter how long we keep on driving, we will never hit the ground. We'll never get into the sky, and we will never hit those walls. Those are always just rendered just outside of our view, straight to the camera. So the very, very first thing that we're going to do here is that way we can kind of see what we're doing. I'm going to right click over here in the hierarchy. This is where all of the game objects in our scene live. And I'm going to right click out here, and I'm going to create a 3D object. And we're going to start off today with a plane. Now, unlike a math plane, a Unity plane is a flat surface, just like in math. It only has one side, which is a little different than its math counterpart. And as you can clearly see, it is not infinite, whereas a math plane would be of infinite length and width, or length and depth, depending on your perspective. This has also given me a chance to see the cursor controls here. And if I click on one of these little triangles, that's my position controls. And we can see up here in the object's transform component that it has an X and a Y and a Z value. Those map to red, green, and blue axes. And if you're familiar with the RGB color system, you can kind of think of that as RGB equals XYZ, and it works out pretty nicely. But grabbing these little triangles, that's going to let me move in X. This one is going to let me move in Z. And that one will allow me to move in Y. And so I can spin around, and you'll notice that my axis, this is the world axis, and this is my objects axis. And for now, until we change some settings, those are always going to match. The other thing that I'm going to point out here while we're in these controls is the perspective button. Because if you accidentally click it, it will turn into the isometric version, and that can give you very strange results and not what you want. And so like you'll see here, there's some clipping on the bottom of that plane. The angles are weird. It's very trapezoidal. We're getting some very weird camera views here. And that's because we're in the isometric camera view. And literally all we've got to do here is click on this little ISO to turn it back to perspective view, and that's going to make it much more normal for us. The other thing that we want to pay attention to here is that by default, Unity objects don't always come in centered. Just like in math, you've got the origin of the Cartesian grid is probably the wrong word for that. It's a 3D grid. But we're not exactly there. We're a little off on X to the negative. We're a little up on the Y direction. And we're definitely a little bit back on the Z direction. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and center that. We're going to use 0, 0, 0. And that's going to put it basically in the center of the world for us, which is where we want it to be. And that is both the object center and now the world center are in the same place because we're measuring our objects in Unity generally from the center. There's some exceptions and we'll get into those later, but for now it's the center. Now our planes are going to scale. The other object that we can bring in, and I don't know if you necessarily want to do this because we're definitely not going to keep this. This is purely for demonstration purposes, is a cube. And you'll notice, again, the cube rendered really close to the camera, so it looks a lot bigger than it should. But if I drop it down on the plane, you're going to notice that a 1 by 1 by 1 cube is not the same size as a 1 by 1 by 1 plane. And so if we look at our scale values here, scale is basically how much that object is going to expand or contract. You'll notice that my scale on all these is 1 on the plane or 1 on the cube, but these are definitely different sized objects. A plane is going to be 10 times larger than a cube is. And so that's going to affect things. Also, because the cube measures from center, if we reset the transform, you're going to notice that it definitely does not look like a cube anymore. It looks like a squatted, it looks like a rectangular prism, because we only see half of it. But as we can see underneath this plane, if we spin the camera around a little bit, that whole cube is actually there. We've just got half of it underneath the surface of the plane. We're also noticing when we bring our camera down here that the plane is only rendered on one side. That's a pretty normal thing for Unity. That's basically keeping us from texturing sides of objects that we don't really want to texture. And we'll notice the same thing here. I'm going to kind of fly inside the cube. And you're going to see from the inside of the cube here, I can see out of the cube, but I don't see the walls from the inside. So that's also a pretty normal thing. In order to make a cube sit fully on the map, if we start bringing it up a little bit, we can see in our transform that we're a little over 1/2 right now. And if we change this value manually to 0.15, you're going to see that half the cube, or that the entire cube volume is on top of the plane, because we're taking that center point of 0.5, we're lifting our y value by 0.5, and that's going to rest us perfectly on the plane. We're going to use that trick with a few other objects, but different objects do have different sizes, so I hate to say it, but it's just kind of a memorization game to figure out exactly where it goes. But one of my favorite tricks is, even if you can't remember, is you can just bring up the object manually, set it so it's on the plane, and kind of look at it, and I'm like, well, 0.484, 0.5 is probably the right number there. And so 0.5 is going to work. Whoops, I accidentally typed in 0. Let's try 0.5, and there we go. I can also change position, rotation, and scale of these objects. So I've been mostly playing around with these handles and moving them around. And that movement mode is up here using this little crosshair icon, or cardinal directions icon, or however we want to call it. But I can also click these other guys. So this round one with the two arrows in it is going to be our rotation. You'll see that the icon changes, and sure enough, I can rotate that plane into different angles. And that angular rotation is going to go off its respective axes. So for instance, the up axis is the y axis, and you'll notice that the y is my side-to-side rotation. That's because the axis is going straight up and down, and I'm rotating around it. And that's pretty normal. So if we look here, the blue triangle or the blue arrow represents Z. And if I switch my axis view, you'll notice that I would be rotating around where that arrow would be if that axis was still showing. And then same deal for the X. Now I've got this plane. I have really messed this thing up. I really wanted a level plane here, a level playing field, so to speak. And so what I want to do here is fix my rotation. And I've been doing this a lot, but we can click over here in the transform and type in manual values. So for instance, if I double click on this box, it should highlight everything. I don't know why it's not doing that. I can just type in a 0, and that's going to level off my X. A 0 is going to level off my Y, and another 0 is going to level off my Z. And I'm just using tab to jump between those cells. So an easy way to do this, if you want to level out your objects, is just keep on hitting tab a bunch of times. Tab 0, tab 0, tab 0, tab 0, and it's going to put you where you want. I do tend to prefer keyboard shortcuts. The last button up here that we're going to talk about right now is this one here. It's the fourth button over. It's just to the right of rotate, and this is our scale. And you'll see that the arrows, instead of being arrows, it's square knobs, and that is allowing us to scale our objects at different dimensions. So I'm scaling it down. I'm scaling this one kind of up. And with a plane, you'll never notice a difference with the Y value because, like a mathematical plane, scaling in the Y direction, it's infinitely thin. And so it doesn't matter how much I scale this, it's always just going to be 0 because 0 times, currently I have 19.6871. 19.6871 times 0 is still 0, kids. So it's gonna just remain perfectly flat. So we're going to go ahead and flip these values again back to 1 because I want to leave things at the defaults. The other thing I can do is if I hate an object, I don't really like the cube that I put in here, you can just click on it in the hierarchy and hit delete. And that's just going to get rid of my cube. Another way to fix a component, if you've changed things and you don't really like your changes, I'm going to kind of mess with some of these things here. And I'm going to mess with my position a little bit. And you're going to see here, my object over here in this transform is completely screwy. And I don't like any of this. And all I want is a nice normal default plane to work with. What we can do is click the little hamburger here on the upper right side of this. It's that vertical dot. Actually, I think since they're just dots and not lines, I think that's technically a snowman. I don't know who names these UI pieces, but it's kind of ridiculous. We're going to go ahead and click on our snowman and hit reset. And that's going to just put everything nice and back to normal. We call this zeroing out a transform because our position and rotation is returned to zeros and our scale is ones because 1 times any object returns it back to its normal size. So despite the fact that those scales are 1, this is still zeroing out an object. If we change those to literal zeros, we have a problem because now we are infinitely small and we can't see anything. So we're going to fix that again. And now we have our plane. Now, I do know, because I've done this lab a few times, I actually want a little bit bigger playing field than this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually scale this up. I'm going to give myself about a 10 by 10 by 10 playing area. So I'm going to change myself to 10 on the X. Again, I'm going to leave the Y at 1 because that can create some weird behavior if we change that number. and changing that number isn't going to do anything for us anyways, but I'm going to change the Z to 10 as well. And then I'm just going to zoom out just a little bit so I can kind of see the plane a little bit more clearly. Now, some of you guys messing with your mouse and keyboard controls may end up doing something funky like this, and maybe like this, and oh my gosh, I can't see my plane anymore. And if this happens to you, don't worry about it. Anytime you lose track of a game object, you can literally just go over here on this plane, double click on it, and it's going to bring it back in view. Now, it is going to maintain the angle of the camera that you had. So for instance, if we look up here, I'm kind of moving so that I've got my Y is straight up, my Z is kind of coming out towards my lower left, and my X is kind of going out in front of me. If I double click on my plane, I'm going to be in that exact same camera orientation, but the plane is going to be centered in my view. If I pivot upwards, I'm looking up now. I can see the moon there. Again, if I click on plane, it's going to be in my center view, but because I'm on the other side of it, I can't actually see it. I can see the outline of where it should be if I zoom out far enough. But really, I'm going to look downwards now, click on the plane, and now I can see it pretty well. I'm going to spin my camera view around a little bit. I don't really like what I've been doing here. Really what I want is this is kind of a sensible orientation now that I've been messing around with this a lot, where my X is to my right, my Y is up, and my Z is forward, which is the natural kind of state of things. So this is a pretty good view to be in. If I want to lock a view, I can also click that, and it's basically going to just center specific views. So like if I click on this, the Y triangle, I'm going to be looking straight down. If I click this one, I'm going to be looking straight forward, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Or straight to the side or whatever, and then I can kind of angle down from there. But again, I'm going to just kind of get it so that I can kind of see what's going on, and there's my play field. Now, what we're going to be doing today is gray boxing, and ordinarily for gray boxing, the whole terminology, you generally don't color things. But what we're quickly going to discover is that it's very, very difficult to see a lot of white objects on white, even with shadows and lighting and stuff taking effect. And Unity allows us to make materials for 3D objects very, very easily. So I like to throw just some very, very simple materials, some very simple colors in, mostly because they just help me maintain my view. So what I'm going to do here is, and we also want to maintain some good organization, because as these projects get larger and larger and larger, we end up having some trouble keeping track of things. And so in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to right click down here in our assets. This is any files that exist as part of our project. That would be code, that would be sprites, sprite sheets, that would be materials, that would be any prefabricated objects that we've made. That would be 3D, I think I already said 3D models, textures, anything that we create is going to go down in here. Film clips, just about anything. So we want to organize all that stuff. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to go in and I'm going to right click out here in the gray area of assets. I'm going to go up to create, I'm going to say folder, and we're going to make a folder called materials. The materials folder will obviously hold any materials that we create over the course of this tutorial. So I'm going to double click on materials, and I'm going to right click here, and I'm going to go back up to create again, and I'm going to create a custom material. And I'm going to call this material grass. And as we can see down here in the lower right, this is kind of what a default material looks like in Unity. And this is what it would look like if it were applied on a 3D object with kind of the default lighting sets, which gives us a pretty good view of how that material is going to behave in the real world. By default, we've got a lot of things that we can edit in here. I'm only going to go over a couple of those today because this isn't really a materials tutorial. So we're going to leave our rendering mode opaque. Our shader is going to stay at standard. What we're really going to mess with is the albedo, which is the color of light that this object is going to reflect. And although we could put a texture or an image in here, I don't have any made right now, and this is just a gray box. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to go here in the color picker, And I'm going to select me a nice darkish green and close that. And as we can see, this is a pretty matte, it's a pretty matte texture. I could alter the metallic, which is its reflectivity, and you can start seeing a little bit more of the horizon appearing in that in the image. And I can make it almost completely matte like a rubber ball if I want to, where we're getting very, very little of that. I can also alter, I'm going to leave this up a little bit for now just to demonstrate, but I can also alter the smoothness or the shininess or the plasticity of this object. If I go really far to the right, it's going to be really smooth and shiny. And if I knock the metallic down, it's almost kind of a glassy surface. And again, if I lower it, it's going to be almost like, it's going to be very, very rough. With that and the metallic down, it almost looks like a rubber bouncy ball to me. And for my grass, I'm going to leave the smoothness up a little bit so we get just a little bit of shine, little tiny bit of metallic, and that feels fairly good to me. And now we can just grab that texture and drop it on our field, and we've now painted our grass green. That feels a little more normal than just having a big white field. But it's not super detailed. This is one of those cases where as the designer, I'm just creating some mock-up. We're going to let an artist come in later and actually texture the heck out of this thing and, make it pretty and everything. I'm just trying to get some basic layout here. And so I'm working with Unity as if I was a designer as opposed to as an artist. Okay, the next thing that we want to do, and this is really the goal here, was to show you the Prefabs engine. So we're going to prefab, and so we're going to start off by just creating a single soldier, and we're going to use that soldier to show how powerful the engine is for making entire armies. So the very, very first thing that I'm going to do, anytime you create a prefab, it's really good practice to create an empty, so again, I'm going to right-click in my hierarchy here. I'm going to create an empty object. And the very, very, very first, and that's going to contain all my stuff. We're going to name this soldier because this is going to be my first soldier. And the very, very first thing I want to do with that prefab is it is way below the earth. If we double click on it, oh my gosh, look at where he is. The earth is up there somewhere. I don't even see it. We're so far out. But we are a long ways from Kansas here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, oh, there we go. That's definitely not where we want it. That's a pretty bad location. So I'm going to do my usual, which is zero that out. And we're going to start messing with this prefab right from the ground. In the center for now, we'll place our armies and stuff later, but we really need to make a soldier before we can do anything with it. So I'm going to take this soldier and we're going to kind of zoom in a little bit and we're going to start building him up a little. And again, we're not going to do a lot of detail. Again, this is just a prototype. And so I'm not an artist here. Eventually my 3D modeler is going to come in and do stuff, but I want to work on some layout before the modeler's done with her art. So I'm going to take my soldier prefab. And I think I'm just going to put a capsule in there. So if I go down to, if I right click on my soldier and I go down to 3D object and then capsule, again, I've got a capsule that's kind of just buried halfway down here. Now capsules, whoops, I just kind of lost it. Let's angle down and just double click on the capsule. There he is. Okay, so I double clicked on the capsule so I can see him a little bit better. And just like the cube, it's halfway buried. Now, capsules have a height of 2, and so if I move his Y up to 1, that's going to give us a pretty nice little view of our capsule, and this is going to be basically our guy. Now, we've got one small problem with him, and really that is if he's out in the field, we really can't see where he's even looking. He's very round. He's definitely not he's not very user friendly right now. And so again, just to give him a little bit of quick shape here, I'm going to assign him a color. And then since I used green for the ground, ordinarily I would use green for friendlies and red for enemies. But since I already used green, what I'm going to do is just assign him a decent blue. Now, since already have a material that I kind of liked, I like the settings on this and everything, I'm going to use the duplicate function. So I'm going to click on my grass material. I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate. That can also be found under Edit, Assets. No, I was right at the first time. It is under Edit. It's under Edit, under Duplicate, and that would also allow me to clone that object. I now have a grass 1. We're going to change this. I'm going to change this to player color, and we're going to change the albedo. I'm going to leave everything else alone, but we're going to change that albedo to a nice little blue here. And again, we're just going to drag that material on, and now our player is blue. That didn't help us with orientation, but it does help us when we zoom out, we can actually see him. So that's a good thing. Now for orientation, and this is where we're really going to start getting into prefabbing, is I'm going to start off. I'm going to want to clone him later, and I did mean to make him a prefab this entire time. And so what we're going to do is we're going to right click again on we're going to click on our assets folder. We're going to right click in this assets area. I'm going to create a new folder, and we're going to call this one prefabs. And this is where we're going to store any prefabs that we make over the course of the tutorial. We're going to go in there, and I'm going to drag my soldier down into this prefabs folder, and there's where he's going to live. And something I want to point out that I guess I didn't really think about before, I just kind of do some of these things by habit. But one of the things that I did here was I took my soldier. You'll notice that his what we call pivot point, because the game object is still at 0, 0, but I've lifted the feet up above. What that's going to do is that's going to allow me to place the soldier by placing his feet instead of having to place the center of his body, which for me is a much more sensible way to be placing. It's a lot easier for me to think about rather than trying to figure out what's half his height again. I can just put him on the ground by saying 0. So this is a pretty useful thing. Now that we have a prefab created, one of the coolest things we can do, and if you've created your prefab and you can see your soldier down here, you can go ahead and do this at home, is I'm going to go ahead and just delete my soldier right out of the hierarchy, not out of the prefabs folder, out of the hierarchy. And the cool thing is I can drag soldiers back in all I want just by dragging a soldier from my prefabs folder into the hierarchy. And so that's going to allow me to create some objects here pretty fast. So what I'm going to do is I do want to add some orientation to this guy, but I want to kind of prove the point of why this is an issue. So I'm going to start off by kind of just making a little squad of soldiers here. We're going to put them right next to each other. And while I could just try to eyeball this, I'm going to use a little bit of math and just kind of plan things out. This guy is at 1.487, and so I'm just going to move him. I'm going to nudge him to 1.5, and then I'm going to grab this little soldier here, and I'm going to run him up to 3. That's going to give me some nice even spacing. And then I'm going to use the Control D duplicate trick again, but because this guy's my center and he's my first soldier, I really want to start placing on the other side. So I'm going to drag this guy over here, and you're going to notice that that's about negative 1.5. So I'm going to adjust that. I'm going to duplicate him again. Again, I'm using Control D to do my duplicates, but I could use the Edit Duplicate menu. I'm going to set this guy to -3. And now I've got 5 evenly spaced guys. Now this works out fine, except, again, we can't really see where he's facing. And we can't really see, are they going this way or are they going over here this way? We really, really don't know. And so what I'm going to do is now I'm going to go into the Prefabs Editor. Now that we've seen this, I want to add a little bit of detail. So I'm going to go into my soldier prefab. I'm going to click on Open Prefab, and this is going to let me have some more capsules, or I'm sorry, this is going to let me edit my capsule. And I really need to pay attention here because it's easy to get lost in this editor, and it has its own space. I can't see the map. I can't see anything else. It's really easy to get lost, and I need to remember that my forward, green is up, red is right, and blue is forward. So I need to make sure that anything I do, I'm respecting that forward axis. And I want to give this guy a little face. He's going to end up looking almost like an Among Us guy by the time I'm done with this. But again, I'm keeping it simple. So I'm going to add a sphere. And I could just put this sphere above his head like that. That looks a little more like a person. It kind of reminds me of those Fisher-Price little people toys that I played with when I was little. But in this case, we still have the exact same problem here, which is we can't tell which way he's facing. And we don't know enough about art yet to be able to put a face on him. So it's going to be a lot easier if we just adjust his positioning. So I'm going to take my sphere. Again, I'm going to pivot a little bit. I want to make sure I'm looking kind of where my forward is here. So I'm paying attention to my Z arrow. And I'm just going to drag this. I'm going to squish it back down into his body. And then I'm going to pull him forward just a little bit. And he's looking a little creepy right now, but that's okay. I'm going to scale him down to 0.7. And that's just going to make that sphere quite a bit smaller. And I'm just going to drag it out front a little bit. And now we've just got kind of a little face poking out. And this guy really does kind of remind me of one of the characters from Among Us. And so we've got that little white face poking out. And that's pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and exit the Prefab Editor now. And the way we do that is by clicking this little left arrow. It's really easy to miss, but if we look at the soldier bar, that means I'm in the soldier prefab. We click left here, and what you're going to notice is that that is automatically updated on all of my prefabs. So I don't have to do this every single time. I just have to do it once and edit the once on my prefab. Okay, the other thing I want to do is my next goal is, again, we were talking about like blocks of soldiers, and these guys are great, but they don't really strike fear into my heart or anything. There's only 5 of them. So what I want to do is add them some friends. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the first soldier, and I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and that allows me to multi-select and hit the last one. I could also do this by holding down the Control key and clicking individual soldiers, and you could also use Control to highlight things, you know, kind of out of order or unselect things if you wanted to. But in this case, since I'm highlighting all of them, I'm just going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to click the last one. That's going to highlight all of them in between. And then again, I'm going to do the same thing I did last time, which is Control D. And what I want to do is make another rank of soldiers behind the first one. So again, I kind of want to pull these guys back. Now, each one of them has a different X value because they're all in different X positions. And that's why we see a little dash here under X. We could type in a number, and I'm going to do that, but you shouldn't. If I do something like 2, what that's going to do is it's going to look like there's only 1 because it's moving all of their X values to 2. I'm going to hit Escape, and then I'm going to Control Z that. To put them back, because again, I don't really want that. They all have the same Y value anyways, because again, they're just sitting just off the ground. But my Z value, I want them all to have the same Z value, which is a little bit back. So I'm going to set all of their Z values at once to 1.5. And then I'm going to go ahead and clone them again. We're going to knock them back a little bit. We'll set their value to -3. And since I still want this soldier to be in the front, I'm just going to keep on working my way back. So we're going to click on these guys again. We're going to duplicate them back. These guys are going to be -4.5. And we're going to do one more set. So that way I got a nice little block of 25 guys here. These guys are going to be at -6. And as you can see, I now have a legion of troops ready to move forward. Now, this is getting a little bit big, and also what happens when I want to start managing the entire block? Well, the cool thing about the new prefab system is it allows us to have prefabs inside of prefabs. So what we can do here is I'm going to create a new empty object. Again, I'm going to make sure that I zero it out first. And since this one is my squad, I'm going to change this to squadron, squad's fine. I'm going to change it to squad. I'm going to drag it down here into my prefabs folder to make it into a prefab. And then let's start populating that thing. I'm going to go ahead and take all the soldiers that are currently in the currently here. So I'm going to, again, do the shift highlight trick. Clicked on the first one, held down shift, clicked on the last one. And I'm going to drag one of them, which will drag them all, into over top squad here, which should put them all inside squad. And you can see that if I bundle this up, I can use the triangle to basically hide them all, and I can manipulate the squad. Now, here's the problem, is I made my squad prefab a little too quickly, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. If I click on squad and I click open prefab, there's nothing there. None of those new soldiers that I made count. So we're going to exit squad for a second. But this squad actually has them, and that's because I modified the squad in the hierarchy rather than modifying the squad in the Prefab Editor. Now, as it turns out this time, I actually want to keep those settings. I like my squad, and really what I want to do is change the prefab so that it matches the squad. I want to change the prefab so it matches the squad that I have on screen. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on my overrides button on the squad, and this allows us to change things. And I can do things individually, but that's honestly kind of complicated. What I'm going to do is just pay attention to these two bottom buttons. Revert all would change this squad to be like the squad prefab, which is again empty, so we definitely don't want to do that. But apply all is going to say, hey, the changes that I have, I actually want them to reflect what a squad is. So I'm going to go ahead and click on apply all, and you can notice down here that my squad prefab has changed. Now the cool thing is now I can drag more squads on the scene, and I'm going to click and kind of move those around using my editor, and now I've got multiple squads. Now what we're going to do is we're going to realize, you know what, I would rather that these squads have just a few more troops in them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my squad view, or I'm into my squad prefab, so I'm going to click on squad. I'm going to click on prefab, and I'm just going to open this up. I'm going to highlight, I'm going to get my, I'm going to angle my camera using the Alt and left mouse key, and I'm just going to highlight that back row of squad guys, because I wasn't sure exactly which ones they were. I'm going to go ahead and click over here in my hierarchy. I'm going to Control D to duplicate that back row, and we're going to move these to negative 7.5. So now we're at negative 7.5. We've got a nice little another row of guys here. And the cool thing is if I leave squad, and the reason we did this is you'll see that all of my squads now have 6 ranks of troops, which is pretty cool. Okay, so I can quickly and easily make changes to the entire squad. Now, another problem that I'm having is, as cool as these little guys are, if we're looking at them from the back, we can't really see which way they're facing. And I'm not really super thrilled with that. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to give them little weapons, and you know, I kind of like playing with prefabs, and I kind of like playing with my blockout characters. So we're going to give them some weapons, and we're going to make them little tiny swords. And one of the things I want to demonstrate here is how even the Unity primitives, so the primitive shapes, your cubes, your spheres, your cylinders, etc., can really make some pretty versatile different objects. And we're not going to go crazy. I could really go to town with some cylinders and some things and make some really cool swords, but we're just going to make something basic here. So again, I'm going to go into my soldier prefab, click on open prefab. I'm going to kind of scroll in here, and I'm going to right click. I'm going to add a capsule to the mix. And you might be wondering why I'm going to add a capsule, because that doesn't look anything like a sword. Well, if I click on my scale button, I can start doing some scaling. And so I'm going to start off by scaling my X really narrow. And that's going to give me a nice, really thin shape. In fact, I'm going to go even more than that. I'm going to go down to, and I'm kind of paying attention to the X in my inspector. That 0.5 is looking pretty good. So I'm going to go 0.05 in for my X. And now we can see it's almost looking like a wakeboard, but we've got a really, really narrow thing. Then I'm going to grab the Z and narrow this out, and we can start to see that our sword is kind of starting to take shape here. In fact, I might even narrow the X a little bit more. That's looking pretty good. And so my Z actually is closer to 0.05, and my X is going to be closer to 0.02. 0.02. My X is going to be a little closer to 0.02. So now I've got, it's looking definitely a lot more sorty and a lot more sharper. I'm going to switch. I'm going to go to my arrow keys. I'm going to pull that out. That's a pretty long sword, so we're going to drop it to the Y scaling to about 0.6, and that looks a little bit more reasonable. Okay, that's a pretty good size and shape. That's definitely not a placement that I'm really happy with, but that's okay. We're going to rotate it first. So I'm going to click on the rotation, and I'm going to rotate it around the X-axis, so that way it kind of points forwards a little bit. That's definitely not a place where you would want to keep your sword, but that's okay. I'm going to switch to my position controls, and we're going to get it so it's just kind of touching, and we're going to kind of move it. And so now it kind of looks like he's holding it kind of thrust out forward a little bit. So that's starting to look like a much, much better sword. I'm not thrilled with that angle either. So we're going to pull that back a little bit. We're going to pull that back even more. Okay, that's starting to look a little bit more like a sword being held than it did before. And yeah, that's not exactly a screen accurate sword, but it's better than it was. It's pretty good for a prefab. So the next thing I want to do, just because I enjoy playing with materials and I want to try making something a little shinier this time, is I'm going to create a new material. And this one isn't going to look like any of the other stuff. So I'm going to do that from scratch. So I'm going to right click in my hierarchy, go to create, go to materials. And for this one, I'm going to choose a darkish gray. So something down in the, the 90s, 99s here. That's looking pretty good. And I'm going to go very, very smooth, and I'm going to go very, very metallic. And what that's going to do is that's going to give me, whoops, I'm still white. My color choice must not have taken. Let's do something like that. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. Maybe I'll take away some of that smoothness. There we go. That's looking kind of metally. So metal value of 0.6 is looking pretty good. I'm sorry, metallic of 0.8, smoothness of about 0.6. And we're going to take that new material. We're going to throw it on my prefab. Look at how shiny metal that is. Isn't that cool? We're going to put that on that sword, and that's looking pretty metal. And this is going to make it so that when we go back to our map, so I'm going to, again, click the little left arrow next to soldier. You can see they've all got their little swords, and no matter which direction I'm facing, I can kind of see which direction they're facing. Okay, so the last thing I want to do here, and then I'm going to show you the awesome power of prefabs, but the next thing I'm going to do here is, I played a lot of Warhammer when I was a kid, and one of the things I really loved was each squad was like led by a commander that was like tougher and bigger and stronger than the rest. And so what I want to do is I want to kind of replicate that. So I'm going to go back into my prefabs. I'm going to click on my squad. I'm going to open my prefab, and I'm going to find which of these soldiers is the first one. Now, because I built my squad around him, I know it's the first one, but we're going to pretend that I don't know that. So I'm going to find my front center soldier, and I just want him to be a little bit bigger than everybody else. So I'm just going to scale him to 1.2. So he's just a little bigger than everybody else. And because I did built the game object off of his feet, that entire scale is going to work upwards and outwards. He's still basically standing on the same ground as everybody else, but we can see he's quite a bit bigger. And I'm going to also click, and I'm going to overwrite his material. So I'm going to click on him. That's going to highlight him here in the inspector so I can see which one is him. And I'm going to go down to his capsule material. I don't remember if this actually... Nope, that's going to affect all of them. I can't do it like that. So what I'm going to do is, I guess I'm just going to make a new material. We're going to go ahead and apply that one instead. So I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to make like a sergeant color material. And really all I'm going to do here is kind of just ramp up the shininess and ramp up the smoothness, make him look a little glassier, and drop that on there. And now he just has a little bit different look. He stands out a little bit. He's a little distinct. And when I drop back to the squad, you're going to notice that all of my sergeants have now taken that ability. So the cool thing here, and this is the takeaway, is that now that I've got these prefabs, I can modify them all I want. And so I'm hoping that you learned a little bit about prefabs and nested prefabs and how to change those layers. Something else I didn't show you is you can also change individual items. So for example, if I want to change just this one little guy, I can still override things. So like I want to make this one green. I want to make this one metal colored for some reason. I can still change individual squad members, and you're going to notice that they retain those changes. But the other problem here is that they will retain those changes. So if I change something else, like I recolor them or something like that, if I recolor the squad, those ones won't change. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate my grass again. I'm going to make a red material. We're going to just change that to a shade of red. And if I go back into my soldiers prefab, I'm going to open that up. I'm going to go back to my materials. I'm going to select that red color, and I'm going to drop it on my soldier. So now this guy's really looking like an Among Us guy. But if we go back, you'll see that all of them changed except for the sergeants, because those guys were overridden from the original prefab, and these two guys here, because they were never part of that, or they've changed away from that original prefab. I can still change other parts. For example, if I go back into my soldier, that's not what I wanted. If I go back into my soldier, I can change his face color, and you'll notice that all of them, even the modified ones, get the new face color. And that's because I had never changed that setting on any of these other guys. But I had changed their body color. So if I want to get them back to normal body color, I could change them back to being red again. But if I do that, I'm still overwriting the prefab. I'm still changing those settings manually. And so, for example, if I go back into my prefabs, I'm going to change the soldiers back to being blue again. I'm going to change them back to their old, I'm going to do a blue and green color scheme instead. Actually, let's do blue and red. I like that better. We'll do a blue and red color scheme. They're still not changed correctly. And that's because their prefab has been overridden. We're changing what's going on with those guys. But what I can do is click on them, find it in the inspector. So I found this soldier. I'm going to go to soldier 19 because that's the one that's being highlighted. And again, I can go to, I should be able to go to it. Why isn't it letting me do that? I should be able to do a revert here, but it's not letting me do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to revert the entire squad. That's going to be easier. So I'm going to click on the squad, and I'm going to go to my overrides. I'm just going to say, since these two are overridden, I'm just going to click on revert all, and that's going to change the entire squad so that, again, they all match. And so now all my squadron members match. And that's about it. So that's basically the conclusion of the tutorial. But if you want to see the next step, this is something you won't be able to do from home because it's using models that I have that you won't have and that you don't have access to. But if you want to see the next step, this is what we would be doing in an actual product. Is I can now go, oh, my artist finished doing their work. And so for this, I'm going to be using some models from a friend of mine, two friends of mine. Melanie Templin sculpted the body, and Wilson Comer sculpted the weapons for this guy. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my prefab. I'm going to open up my soldier prefab. And now that I've got my models, so we're going to pretend that I've just gotten these from my artists. I'm going to go in and I have this new soldier model, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to lay that in the soldier prefab. And you can kind of see it poking out. And what I'm going to do is, since I don't need this capsule or the sphere or the old capsule anymore, or the sword anymore, I can go ahead and delete those out of my prefab, leaving only the new soldier sculpted by Melanie and Wilson. And I can pop those out. And now I have a legion of soldiers ready to play. And you'll note that their sergeant is still just a little bit bigger because he's still got that scaling override on him. So I can very, very quickly change from my sculpted prefabs into a legitimate little army here with just a couple clicks. So thank you to Melanie and Wilson for helping me out with that. And I'm definitely going to make sure that their ArtStation links are in the comments, or in the description. So definitely check out their work and give them a thumbs up or whatever. Anyways, so that's the conclusion of this tutorial. I hope you learned a couple things about prefabs. I guess like and subscribe. I don't know, this is my first time doing this thing, so I hope you all enjoyed this tutorial. And in the next one, we're going to learn how to use prefabs to set up some basic environmental objects and do some little bit fancier gray boxing. All right, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Have a great day, everybody. Like and subscribe.